So I can't, I actually can't imagine coming up to speak after a better intro of learning. I mean, of listening, sorry. So this will be the test to see if you were really listening to Dave. Um, you know, when we were talking about kind of the theme for tonight, Dave and I were talking that listening and learning are like intimately connected, right? You can't be a good learner if you're not a good listener. And I was thinking about this as it relates to just ministry in general and how we interact with people. There's a guy in our church that's kind of, I would say, kind of like he tiptoes around the church. You know what I mean? Like you'll see him for like a month, and he's like, high energy, and then you won't see him for 6 months. And we have, most of you have people like that in your church. And we had this guy, and he reached out to me some months ago, and he says, "Okay, I'm in. I'm ready to be all in." He's like, "What I've found that's really important for me to be connected to a church is to serve somewhere. So can we meet up and figure out where I'm supposed to serve?" Which, man, as a pastor, that's awesome, right? And so we get together and we sit down, and he starts going down this list of places that he'd served in other churches and how he really didn't like any of those things. And then he said to me, "So anyways, where do you think I should serve?" And I had just listened to this whole thing, and I'm like, there was kind of this long pause, and I was considering everything he just said. And I said, "Well, where are you passionate about? What are the things that really like get you excited?" And he paused for a long while. And then out of him came this vision that God had put in his heart years earlier. And for the next 25 minutes, he just like laid it out for me on the table. And I said, "Man, let's do that." And I that's been something I feel like the Lord has taught me. So oftentimes when in ministry, we have all of these cogs that we're trying to like get to connect with each other, all these things that we're trying to accomplish. And we often look at people in our lives as kind of like, how can we get them to connect with the things that we have to do? And part of this listening that Dave was talking about connects with this learning. As you listen to people, you learn what God is doing in their life. And maybe it's not intimately connected to the number one ministry in your church, but man, it is something that God is calling you to walk along with them and release them into doing. So that's the link here between listening and learning. I'm going to ask you, just kind of starting off, can you think of a time in your life that was maybe one of the most influential seasons of just growth, where you were just learning so many things and applying them, and you felt fresh and excited, and all this new information and these new experiences? Think of that time. For many of us, it was a long time ago, wasn't it? It was when we were younger, maybe before we were married, or before we had kids and we had more time. For many of us, maybe it was during seminary. Oh, wow. All of these great professors and all this great content. I often think of the disciples when Jesus called them to follow him. Can you imagine how they felt as Jesus was teaching them? And he was demonstrating the new way of the kingdom. I mean, we have never heard this before. We've never thought this way before. We've never been given this opportunity before. It was so exciting, so amazing. And so for us, God allows us to go through these seasons where we're just, so much is being downloaded into us, so many exciting things, so many fresh things. And then we often get to a point where we just kind of stop. We kind of stagnate. We're kind of just going through the motions. I was looking up, Lifeway had this some statistics on the duration of a pastor, the average duration of a pastor at his church. Some of you have probably heard this before. It's 4 to 5 years. The average duration of a pastor at church is 4 to 5 years. Now, if you grew up, if you were a part of a Methodist church, you had to move, right, every few years. But this is across denominations. Somebody said years ago that the reason that is after about 4 to 5 years, the things that you've learned, you've already spent them. Think about the amount of time you spend at seminary. So the average seminary time is about 3 to 4 years. You're getting downloaded all this information, and then you serve in a church. you kind of regurgitate or you share all this information, and then you run out. And then you're at this place in your life where if you aren't continuing to learn, there is this stagnation, and people maybe start to get tired of you at that point. Hey, you don't have anything fresh to say. You get tired of you. You realize nobody's listening anymore. Man, I better start over somewhere where I can, again, go back to year one and go through my 4 years of content and then start over again. Maybe some of you have felt this before. Maybe some of you have been there before. So when we think of learning, we go back to the original call of discipleship. Follow me. It's a lifelong call, but it's also a huge stumbling block in our current day. The idea of continuing to learn. We first of all live in a DIY culture. You know what that means, right? Do it yourself. And so we have all the information at our disposal. We can figure it out ourselves. We don't need anybody to teach us or show us, maybe except for a YouTube video or something like that to fix our car. We can do it ourselves. And combined with the DIY culture, we, in the last, probably 20 years, or maybe a little bit more, there's been this massive emphasis on leadership. Everybody's to be a leader. Everybody has to be the best leader. Here's the newest book on leadership. I did a quick search on Amazon. There are over 60,000 books with the title Leader or Leadership. How many ways can you repackage how to be a good leader? So I can't help but wonder if the church in America, and especially us as pastors, ministry leaders, have forgotten what it means to be a good follower. What does it mean to follow Jesus, to continue to learn? In a culture full of how-to content, now more than ever, I think we need people to model that following of Jesus, much more than we need to just talk about it. And so at the heart of learning is following. It's following Jesus where he's leading us. Many of you are familiar with Matthew chapter 11. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. We love that verse. It's important. Matthew 11:29, there's kind of a reiteration of that. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So sandwiched in between this invitation to find rest is the invitation to learn. Sometimes I feel like we skip that part. That learning from Jesus actually leads to a place of rest. You know, when I first came to Renton, I'd been in ministry in Eastern Washington for about 10 years. And my wife and I were preparing to move our family over here. We have 4 kids. I've been here, the pastor here now for 6 years. And we were first coming to Renton, and I did what I'd always done in other ministry positions. I sat down and I said, okay, I'm going to write down my vision. And I'm going to send this ahead of time to the church so they know what to expect. And then as soon as I hit the ground, man, we're going to just go. We're going to hit the ground running. Here's the 10 things we're going to accomplish over the next 5 years. I was excited. I'd done this before. I helped grow ministries. Like, this was it. And I remember sitting down in my front room. Kids had gone to bed, and I had my computer, and I was getting ready to type. And I very clearly felt the Lord say, stop. Don't do that. And I was like, but how are they going to know that I'm a good leader? And how do they know that I'm going to be coming into this with excitement? And I felt like the Lord said, just don't do it. And so I'm like, okay. Well, I had done missions work in East Asia. So I'm like, okay, maybe Lord, you're saying before I write this vision out, I need to do some research. So I'm going to do a little bit of kind of demographic and cultural research on Renton a little bit. And so first I was thinking about the current context I was in. I was in the pretty affluent town called Liberty Lake, Washington. And here's the demographics of Liberty Lake. 92% white. And then it's a small town, 7,000 people. So when you look at percentages, it was like, oh yeah, we know all the Hispanic people in town, right? It was very kind of monocultural. And so then I compared that to where we're getting ready to move in Renton. Very different. In fact, in our neighborhood right here, we have, when you see Asian, that encompasses Vietnamese, Chinese, Filipino, East Indian. And I went, wow, okay, it's going to be a different context. So it's good that I hadn't written out my vision yet. Now I know what I'm getting into. And so I sat down and I attempted to write my second draft of my vision. Now it's time, right, Lord? And again, he said, stop, don't do it. So I came to the church very uncomfortably with no idea of what to expect. I felt very strongly, though, that God was calling me to focus more on following him than leading. And that was completely out of my comfort zone. Now, this hasn't meant that I was going to do nothing, but it meant that my posture coming into this ministry position was going to be different than it had ever been before. In the past, I was much more of a Martha than a Mary. If I came in, I'm going to focus on the culture and the environment and the little details. I'm going to craft this and curate this experience that's going to push people into a certain direction. And so I would always be extremely busy. And I remember my wife saying one evening that she felt like the family was getting my leftovers. But that's just how I worked. If I work hard, then the results will produce. But I felt like the Lord said, Andrew, going into Renton, I want you to sit at my feet, to listen, and to watch where I'm going to lead you. One of my key verses in the last few years has been Proverbs 16:9. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. This is a posture of learning. Lord, I'm going to head in the direction you're calling me to, but I'm going to trust that each day, each moment, each situation, each conversation, you're going to make it clear to me where you are leading me. And so this idea of learning for me was really recapturing, I think, the first call of being a disciple, to follow Jesus in the ways that he was calling me. So one of the first things I remember when we came to our church, some of you have been around for a while, our church used to be called Calvary Baptist Church. And we actually had a sign, we still have a sign out front, but we had a sign that I think was from the 70s. It was brown sign with gold lettering, and it said Calvary Baptist SBC in kind of this gold lettering. It looked like it was about to fall out and kill somebody because it had been there for a long time. We actually found out when we replaced it that it was about to fall out. And then at the same time, our leadership team was calling our church Calvary Renton. They kind of dropped the Baptist moniker. And so I just asked them, like, can we just pick one and go with it? And before I knew it, there was a whole conversation about a name change. Well, we've talked about a whole new name change. And I thought, that's the worst thing that a new pastor can do. Is come into a church and be like, hey guys, first order of business, let's change our name. So I actually didn't believe our leadership team at the time, but we came in and I just began to ask questions, to meet with the families of our church. We were about 40 to 50 folks in our church at the time. And just hear their stories, hear where they were at. And sure enough, it was true. There had been this conversation about a name that better identified with our neighborhood. Some of you know we're on the corner of Sunset and Edmonds. This is the Sunset neighborhood. We actually have a community garden across the street, the Sunset Community Garden. Our city has been revitalizing this neighborhood over the last 10 years. It's called the Sunset Transformation Project, Sunset Community Church. That began this whole journey for me of going, okay, Lord, you have some plans in store for this church, in this community, that I could never have planned for. If I would have sat down and wrote my vision, it wouldn't have been included. And it led from a name change to cooperation with the city in some of the revitalization that we've had here. And then as I began to pastor here, I realized, wow, I have a lot I still need to learn. How do you pastor a diverse church in a diverse city? I have never experienced that before. Again, Liberty Lake was my previous ministry paradigm. How do I pastor a church that looks more like this? And so I thought, man, I still as a leader need to learn. And so I enrolled at Gateway Seminary and started a journey with the Master's in Intercultural Studies. How can I learn to pastor people from these different places? Over the years, we've had two small churches merge with us. And each step of the way I've learned, God has continued to teach me and learn. I've learned more things. One year, I still, my old kind of ways of like setting the vision, I still did that for the church. I still was doing those things. Usually at the end of every year, most of us have an annual business meeting. I would usually share some vision for the next year. And so I still did those kinds of things. It wasn't like I was doing nothing. And so 2017, I did it. 2018, here's some new vision for 2019. 2019, I sat down and I was getting ready to do the vision for 2020. And again, I felt like God said, Andrew, stop. I was like, no. This is my third year here. This is going to be the best year yet. Andrew, don't do it. And so I humbly went to the church in our December meeting and said, these things that we've been trying to be about these last couple of years, I just feel like the Lord's saying, just continue on in those things. Well, I had no idea. A few months later, we wouldn't even be meeting because of COVID. In John 16:13, when Jesus says that the Holy Spirit will guide you into all the truth, he will not speak on his own. He will only speak what he hears, and he will tell you what is yet to come. Sometimes that telling is stop, listen, learn from me. And here's the thing, we often talk about the importance of being Spirit-led as leaders and pastors. But if we're honest, a lot of times we just want to be Spirit-endorsed. I'm going to do this thing, God, just put your stamp of approval on it. I don't even think that it's something we even intentionally do. I think it's just something we do. We just go through the motion. We know what to do. I know what needs to be done. I have to preach a message on Sunday and organize the teams and just keep going. And so as leaders, we need to continually recapture the original call, which is to follow Jesus. So let's talk. At your tables, I'm going to have a few questions like Dave did. I'm just going to put them all up on the screen. Let's talk about how in the midst of our doing, how do we keep a posture of learning? Your church will notice this. When I was going through my master's program, I often had people in our church go, you were just learning that this last week, weren't you? That's something new from you. We've never heard that before. I'm like, yes. How in the midst of our doing do we keep a posture of learning? What is something God has been teaching you recently? You often reflect on that. Let's share that together. If you could take a few months off and dive into a new area of learning, what would that be? And let me say this. You have permission at your tables to share something that is not ministry related. A couple of years ago, I was gifted a Traeger. You know what a Traeger is? A smoker. It unlocked for me like this whole style of cooking that I never knew existed, and it is like my thing. It's my jam. It's one of my hobbies now is smoking meats. I like get twitchy if I don't do it. So if you could take a few months and just dive into some new area of learning, even if it's not ministry related. Here's another question. What is something you've had to relearn in recent years? Sometimes our old ministry paradigms, our old ways of learning, they expire because they're based on culture or environment. What's something you've had to relearn in recent years? And then lastly, why do you think learning from Jesus is linked to having rest for our souls? Are you ready? Let's take some time and chat through these things.